I've always been a rational person. Objects are just that, soulless things, tools we use and discard. At least, that's what I thought until a few weeks ago. My car, a faithful companion for years, had never given me trouble. It was just a means of transportation. But one night, something changed. It was around 3 in the morning when, in the midst of complete silence, the lights of the car, parked in my garage, turned on by themselves. At first, I took it as an electrical fault. I got up, turned off the lights, and went back to bed without giving it much thought. But the next night, it happened again. And then again. The lights flickered for no reason, the engine made strange noises, and a sense of unease began to take over me. Was it my imagination? Was the car really talking to me? I dismissed these thoughts as nocturnal fantasies. But there was something in the air, something I couldn't decipher. What could it be trying to warn me about? Was it just a mechanical error, or, somehow, was my car trying to save me from something much bigger than I could imagine? That was my first mistake, not listening in time. My car and I had shared a lot. Long road trips, endless traffic jams, little weekend getaways. I knew it well, or at least I thought I did. After so many years together, I was familiar with the sound of the engine, the smoothness of the steering wheel, even the faint hum of the air conditioning. But then, suddenly, everything changed. The first time it happened, I didn't think much of it. I was in the kitchen, preparing some dinner, when I saw from the window that the car's lights were turning on by themselves. It was late, and I thought maybe I had accidentally activated the remote. I went out to the garage, turned off the lights, and went back inside. I laughed a little at myself, imagining the absurdity of the situation. A car turning on by itself. Just technology things, I told myself. However, I soon realized it wasn't an isolated event. That same night, around 2 in the morning, the lights turned on again. This time with a slight flicker, as if trying to get my attention. I got out of bed, somewhat annoyed, and went straight to the garage. When I arrived, the lights had already turned off. It was like the car was playing a game with me. It started happening almost every night. A few times a week, the lights would turn on by themselves, and then turn off before I could reach them. Sometimes, when I approached, I felt the temperature inside the car was unusually cold, as if something else was there. I felt uneasy, but what could I do? I attributed it to an electrical fault. You know, these modern cars are full of sensors and systems that you don't even fully understand. Maybe a short circuit, a defective relay. But then, one night, something was different. I was in the living room, watching TV, when I heard a sound that froze me. It was like a faint whisper, a muffled growl, coming from the garage. It was the engine. As if someone had tried to start it, but not completely. The sound was so brief I thought I had imagined it, but when I went out to the garage to investigate, the car was completely off, as if nothing had happened. I stood for a moment in front of the car, studying it. Something wasn't right. For the first time, I felt that this might not just be a series of mechanical faults. Could my car be trying to tell me something? That idea made me feel ridiculous. A car communicating with me? What's next? Toasters asking us for breakfast. But there was something inside me that I couldn't ignore. That feeling that something was trying to reach me, a warning, a message. I decided to take it to the shop, just to have the electrical system checked. The mechanic hooked it up to the computer, and, as expected, found nothing unusual. The car was in perfect condition, no error codes, no faults in the systems. I went home relieved, though a part of me still felt that something was off. The signs grew more intense. The lights no longer just flickered at night, they also did it when I went out to drive in the morning. The air conditioning turned on by itself. Even the music system seemed to malfunction, playing songs I hadn't selected. To someone else, maybe all this would have gone unnoticed, but I knew my car. I knew something strange was happening. One night, after another one of those inexplicable experiences, I sat in the car, in silence, as if waiting for an answer. The atmosphere was heavy, dense, as if the car was breathing with me. And even though I knew it didn't make sense, something inside me told me to pay closer attention. But again, I ignored it. I convinced myself I was overanalyzing everything, that there was no warning, no danger. That was the second time I was wrong. As the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. My car wasn't just turning its lights on or playing random songs. There was something more, something I couldn't quite describe, but it felt like a constant pressure in the air, a kind of latent presence that seemed to watch me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia. Sure, I had been overthinking the incidents, and my imagination was probably playing tricks on me. But then things started getting stranger. One night, I was driving home after a long day at work. It was dark, the road deserted, and the only sound was the engine purring softly. Everything seemed normal until, suddenly, the dashboard lights began to flicker. At first, it was a slight vibration in the speedometer lights, as if the electricity was fluctuating. Then, the navigation system completely shut off and turned back on, displaying a direction I hadn't programmed. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to stay calm, but something inside me knew this wasn't normal. How could the car change the direction by itself? Despite the strange sensation in my chest, I decided to follow the new path the car was showing me, curious to see where it was taking me. I hadn't gone 2 kilometers when the headlights started flickering on and off rapidly, as if something was interfering with the electrical system. I pulled over to the side of the road, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. Stay calm, I told myself. It's just a malfunction. Everything has a logical explanation. But as I sat there, looking into the darkness, a sense of danger began to overwhelm me. It felt like something imminent was about to happen, something I couldn't see but was approaching quickly. Then, I heard the sound. It was a faint buzzing, like a vibration coming from deep within the car. At first, I thought it was the engine cooling down, but soon I realized it was coming from underneath the seat. I leaned forward, and just as I was about to investigate, the car emitted a deafening beep, as if all the internal alarms were going off at once. My heart raced. Everything in the car was failing simultaneously, the lights, the dashboard, even the air conditioning started blowing wildly. Then it hit me. The car was trying to tell me something, but not in a conventional way. It wasn't a subtle warning, it was a direct alarm. It was clear that there was something beyond mere technical faults. I felt that, in some way, my car was trying to protect me from something. But from what? I decided to take the fastest route back home. I didn't want to stay on that dark road for another minute. As I drove, I started thinking about all the times I had ignored the signs. The flickering lights, the engine starting by itself, the music system playing unsettling songs. All of this was too much to be a coincidence. What if my car knew something I didn't? The idea was absurd, I know. Cars don't think, they don't feel. But at that moment, with the deserted road in front of me and danger lurking like an invisible shadow, I couldn't help but feel I was wrong. The problem was, as clear as the warning was, I couldn't understand what it was trying to prevent. An accident? A mechanical issue? Nothing seemed to make sense. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I felt the steering wheel become stiff. It was as if the car was resisting moving forward. I quickly devised a plan, to take it back to the shop as soon as I got home. But just before arriving, the car stopped completely, as if it had lost all power. I was only a few blocks from home. I got out to check the engine, thinking something might have disconnected or that the alternator might be failing. But when I opened the hood, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. The engine was hot, but everything seemed in place. However, something stopped me from getting back in the car. That feeling, that instinct that had been growing in me over the past few weeks, told me not to proceed. That's when I heard it again, the same buzzing I had noticed under the seat, but this time louder, more insistent. I went back to the car, and it was then that I saw it. Under the car, near the rear wheels, there was a liquid dripping. I leaned in to inspect, and my heart stopped. It was brake fluid. My car, the one that had been talking to me for weeks, was warning me of a critical failure I hadn't noticed. I felt a mix of relief and terror. If I had continued ignoring those signs, I would have gone out on the road without functioning brakes. The car, somehow, had managed to get me to stop before a tragedy occurred. I never thought something like this could happen to me. I wasn't superstitious, but after that night, I couldn't help but wonder, how many times in our lives do we ignore warnings, big or small? And how many of those times are we on the verge of a disaster we're unaware of? My car had done everything it could to warn me. And, finally, I had listened. That night, after discovering the brake fluid leak, I was paralyzed in front of the car, a mix of disbelief and fear washing over me. My car had been giving me signs for weeks, and I, stubborn and rational, had ignored them. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if I had continued driving, if I hadn't stopped. The thought of losing my brakes in the middle of the road was terrifying. I called for a tow truck to take the car to the shop, and while I waited, my mind raced. Everything fit now. The lights, the sounds, the erratic behavior. Somehow, my car had been trying to warn me of the danger. What was most unsettling was that it had all started happening at night, when the house was quiet and I was most vulnerable to noticing what was going on around me. When the tow truck arrived, the mechanic who took the car looked at me with curiosity as I explained what had happened. I couldn't fully convey the feelings I had experienced those nights, how I had come to believe that my car was talking to me. I felt ridiculous even trying, so I just mentioned the brake failure. "It's a good thing you noticed it in time," the mechanic said. I just nodded, still processing how close I had come to disaster. The next day, the shop confirmed my suspicions. There was a leak in the brake system that not only compromised my safety but would have been fatal if I had continued driving without repairing the car. In fact, they told me that the problem had been worsening for weeks, a slow accumulation, imperceptible at first, until that night when it became apparent. The mechanic said I probably would have lost the brakes within days. Hearing this sent a shiver down my spine. All the warnings I had ignored came rushing back to my mind. My car wasn't just alerting me to a mechanical issue, it was saving me from a nearly certain accident. This revelation left me with a deep sense of vulnerability. I had been so close to something that could have changed my life in an instant, and the only thing that stopped me was paying attention to those strange signals, those small warnings that I had dismissed for so long as mere technical faults. That night, I found myself at home, sitting on the sofa, looking out the window at the empty spot where my car used to be. I wondered if it had been pure coincidence, or if somehow, there was a deeper connection between the machines we use daily and ourselves. It was hard not to think about it. How many more times have I ignored warnings, not just in my car, but in my life? Reflecting, I realized how easy it is to ignore warnings when they come from something as mundane as a car. In our daily routine, we are so accustomed to everything working as it should that we don't pay attention to small anomalies. But sometimes, those anomalies are the warning cries we need to avoid disasters. I imagine driving down the highway, at high speed, and suddenly hitting the brakes only to find they didn't respond. That image hit me hard. I had almost reached that point. But my car, in its peculiar way, had warned me. It had done everything possible to make me pay attention, and in the end, it worked. I had heard its warning just in time. After what happened, I began to see things differently. For weeks, I had ignored what, in retrospect, were clear warnings. My car, that object I considered inanimate and of no importance beyond its functionality, had shown me something I never would have believed possible, that even in the most common and everyday things, there are signs, small alarms that tell us when something is wrong. The problem is that often, we are so busy or so immersed in our routines that we don't pay attention. We live with the false security that we have everything under control, that everything around us is predictable, that machines fail in obvious and direct ways. But what I learned was something quite different. Signs can be subtle, almost imperceptible, and only when we are willing to listen to them can they save us from dangerous situations. My car was trying to tell me something. It may sound absurd, but I feel that, in some way, it was looking out for me. Of course, it isn't a conscious entity, but all those failures I had ignored were not coincidences. They were not just system errors. My car, with its flickering lights, erratic music, and strange behaviors, was shouting at me that something was wrong, that my life was in danger. From that moment on, I started paying more attention to the little things. Not only to the signs from the objects around me but also to those in my own life. How many times had I ignored warnings from my body, my environment, or the people around me? This incident taught me the importance of listening, being aware, and not dismissing what seems insignificant. In the end, the lesson was clear. Sometimes, signs are not as obvious as we expect, but they are there. We just have to be willing to pay attention. And when we do, we can prevent small anomalies from becoming major disasters. Now I know that I will never again ignore those small warnings that life, or even a car, gives me. In the end, this experience left me with a lesson I will never forget. Sometimes, the most unexpected things can save us if we are willing to listen. My car, that silent companion through so many trips, became more than just a means of transportation. It showed me that in life, we need to pay attention to the signs, even when they seem insignificant or absurd. I could have suffered a serious accident, but thanks to those warnings that I finally decided to heed, I avoided it. And if this story has any value, it is to remind you that we should not ignore what seems small or irrelevant. Warnings, whether physical, emotional, or even technological, are there for a reason. So I ask you, what signs are you ignoring in your life? It may not be a car, but perhaps there is something or someone trying to tell you something important. I invite you to reflect on it. Share your comments about a similar experience or how you think you might be ignoring a warning in your daily life. Because in the end, listening in time might be what saves you from imminent danger.